What if the last page of a legend's story was blacked out for decades, only to be uncovered by a coroner's pen? Country music is built on blue notes and broken hearts, but few fans realize how many of its brightest voices left the world under circumstances more haunting than any ballad on the charts. Tonight we're stepping into those dim motel rooms, smoldering crash sites, and echoing backstage corridors where the final verses were written in real blood and whispered regret. We'll travel from the frozen highways of the early 50s to the neon honky-tonks of the 90s, tracing the secret autopsy details that rewrote every obituary. Hank, Patsy, Johnny, and Naomi, just 4 names on a list far longer than anyone expected. Some succumbed to the bottle, others to pills, and a few to heartbreak so heavy the heart itself simply quit beating. Stay with me as we tune the dial past the standard tributes. Each segment ends with a cliffhanger that nudges us deeper into the mystery, so don't blink, because the truth behind the twang is about to get louder than any encore. Whether you grew up on vinyl crackle or streaming playlists, this journey will reframe every lyric you thought you understood. Hank Williams was the original shooting star, brighter than anyone and twice as brief. On New Year's Day, 1953, a teenage driver found him slumped in the back seat of a powder blue Cadillac, an empty syringe cap rattling in the ashtray and a half-finished set list stuffed in his pocket. The autopsy blamed right ventricle insufficiency, aggravated by alcohol, morphine, and chloral hydrate. But locals in Oak Hill whispered that the real killer was Nashville's relentless tour grind. In the same decade, another highway tragedy echoed his fate. Johnny Horton, fresh off charting The Battle of New Orleans, was sideswiped by a drunk driver outside Milano, Texas. His chest had caved against the steering wheel so violently that examiners said his heart looked like it had been wrung out. Less than a year later, Jack Anglin, heartbroken after singing at Patsy Cline's memorial, gunned a curve too sharply on the way to the funeral and never made the turn. He died instantly, his death certificate noting a fractured skull and complete ejection from the vehicle. These early losses cemented a cruel theme. The road can be more unforgiving than the critics. By the time Dottie West bled internally from a wreck outside the Opry almost 4 decades later, fans barely flinched. Country culture had been conditioned to expect wheels and steel to snuff out talent. Yet every January, when radio stations replay "I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive," the irony still feels fresh. Hank wrote that song as a joke. The coroner's summary turned it into prophecy. In our next act, the enemy isn't black ice or night fog, but a clear liquid poured neat, and the stars who tried to outrun it would discover that courage and intoxication look identical, right up until they don't. So keep that image of a lonely sedan on a winter highway in your mind, because the very substance Hank once used to steady his nerves would soon swallow a whole generation of voices. Keith Whitley understood heartbreak so well that his records still drip with it, yet the saddest line he ever delivered wasn't on wax. It was the 0.47 that showed up on his toxicology screen. That blood alcohol figure means the bloodstream is nearly 0.5% pure liquor, a level that usually puts the body into a coma before finishing the glass. Friends swore he had been sober in the weeks leading up to May 9th, 1989. But the autopsy told a crueler story. Unopened travel bottles in his suitcase and a phone off the hook beside the bed. A generation earlier, Tammy Wynette tried to medicate chronic abdominal pain the way doctors suggested, through an intravenous catheter that never left her arm. When she died at home at 55, early reports blamed a blood clot. The coroner found congestive heart failure exacerbated by years of prescription painkillers dripping straight into her veins. She had recorded, "Stand by your man," yet in her final days the machine stood by her instead. Lefty Frizzle knew that loneliness too. By 1975, his velvet drawl was drowned by whiskey so potent that his liver had swollen to twice normal size. A massive stroke ended his life at 47. But insiders claim the real expiration date was stamped on the first cork he ever pulled. 3 separate deaths, one shared denominator, a bottle that promised relief but always added interest. And here's the twist. Each of these artists left behind unreleased demos so raw that modern producers still fight over them. It's as if the studio ghosts refuse to leave until the final pour is finished. Up next, we leave the bar and take to the skies, where turbulence comes without warnings, and the price of a missed weather report is measured in memorials. But before we buckle in, remember Whitley's chilling final voicemail to his wife. "I'll be fine once you get home." It was meant as comfort. Instead, it became the timestamp on a tragedy no chorus could soften. When a twin-engine Piper Comanche disappeared into a bank of storm clouds on March 5, 1963, the world lost Patsy Cline and gained a question that still rattles pilots. Why press on? Her autopsy was short, death on impact, every major organ ruptured, and the crash report noted the altimeter was still set for clear skies. Just 16 months later, crooner Jim Reeves vanished in almost identical conditions over Brentwood, Tennessee. Search crews found the wreckage 2 days later, but one fragment of his guitar stayed missing, a jagged chord forever unresolved. The industry started calling that flight path the Widowmaker. Accidents should feel random, yet in country lore they form a pattern as tight as a steel string harmony. Dottie West ignored a mechanic's warning about her shaky Corvette axle in 1991, speeding toward an Opry appearance that would never happen. The car fishtailed and crushed her pelvis. In surgery, she reportedly asked the nurse to make sure her makeup kit got packed for the show. She died before the curtain rose. Aviation and asphalt share a chilling similarity. Both tempt performers to chase the next crowd, even when common sense says, phone it in. The result is the eeriest roll call imaginable. Concert dates replaced by funeral dates. Miles per hour converted into miles over people's hearts. So after we land this chapter, keep the seatbelt fastened. Because the darkness we're heading into next doesn't come from storm clouds. It comes from inside the mind, where no runway lights exist. Listen to the lyrics they left us, and you'll hear premonitions. Cline musing that crazy feels natural. Reeves promising to welcome you to my world. West confessing she was here in the real world all alone. Fans took those lines as invitations. Hindsight hears them as coded warnings. Every accident in this segment lit a beacon for future stars, yet the tour buses still thunder down to 40, and single prop planes still buzz across hot southern nights. The music never stops, but sometimes the instruments do. Depression doesn't rhyme well, so most artists hide it between the lines. Naomi Judd tried to expose it, speaking openly about what she called the dark disease, even while planning a Hall of Fame outfit. On April 30th, 2022, one day before her induction, she used a firearm to silence the voice that once harmonized with her daughter. The autopsy confirmed a self-inflicted wound and cataloged the medications riding shotgun in her bloodstream. A reminder that treatment isn't always a cure. 2 generations earlier, Farron Young placed a pistol barrel against his temple after a cascade of business failures and health complaints. He lingered overnight, perhaps hearing his own record spin in the hospital lobby, then slipped away at dawn. Mel Street followed a similar script, choosing his birthday as the final encore, leaving behind royalty statements that could no longer offset despair. Mindy McCready was barely past 35 when the television crews left her driveway carrying another headline about another troubled singer. She had lost custody of her children. Her soulmate had died by suicide weeks earlier, and the autopsy declared cause of death by the same weapon. On the same porch, a mirror image too tragic for fiction. What links these stories is not weakness but exhaustion, the kind that no standing ovation can fix. Country music champions grit and perseverance, yet its heroes often carry scars the stage lights hide. When the show ends, they walk off into a silence that can amplify every anxious echo. Up ahead, the substances meant to dull that echo will take center stage, and the results make even the coroner's clipboard shake. If you or anyone you love has wrestled with those invisible shadows, remember this. Every one of these stars left unfinished verses in their notebooks. Their families still find comfort reading them aloud, proof that creative fire glows brightest just before it burns out. Hold that image, because the next chapter examines the chemical accelerant too many legends poured on that smoldering pain. The pharmacy aisle has always offered a shortcut to relief, but that path is lined with disclaimers written in tiny print. Luke Bell was a drifter poet whose baritone could hush the rowdiest saloon, yet the silence inside his own head was louder. In August 2022, he wandered away from a Tucson hotel, and 9 days later a passerby found him slumped behind a loading dock. Toxicology revealed fentanyl, cheap, potent, unforgiving, and though he also suffered arteriosclerotic heart disease, the report stamped accidental overdose. Nearly half a century earlier, Graham Parsons mixed morphine and tequila at the Joshua Tree Inn, chasing a cosmic high he'd been writing about since the birds. The autopsy called it a narcotic and alcohol synergistic effect, but fans fixate on the bizarre aftermath. Friends kidnapped his coffin and cremated him in the desert, per his half-joking wishes. Different decades, same chemical roulette. Waylon Jennings, ravaged by years of cocaine that had once cost him over $1,500 a day, finally quit the powder but couldn't quit the damage. Diabetes amputated his foot and heart failure followed. His medical chart read like a pharmacist's inventory, a litany of beta blockers, opiates, and blood thinners required just to balance yesterday's bad choices. Each story underlines an ugly arithmetic. Tolerance rises, dosages climb, and one miscalculation erases a lifetime of encores. In studio folklore, there's a phrase called ghost vocal, the faint imprint left on a track after an engineer erases the main take. Bell, Parsons, and Jennings turned themselves into real ghost vocals, humming through every reissue, unavoidable reminders that the pursuit of expanded consciousness often collapses the body instead. Next, we trade syringes and powders for chronic scars that take decades to close, and sometimes never do. Before we turn that page, picture Luke's guitar still waiting on stage the night he vanished, untuned, untouched, as bartenders wiped down counters and wondered if he'd simply missed sound check. Hope lingered until the coroner ended the search. Grief, however, never clocks out. While some legends burned out fast, others faded under the slow tyranny of failing organs. Johnny Cash spent his final years battling diabetes, neuropathy, and a neurodegenerative disorder so rare doctors kept textbooks open during checkups. His voice dropped into a gravelly whisper, yet he recorded "hurt" as if narrating his own autopsy. Strings building like a heartbeat monitor that everyone knows will flatline. George Jones escaped multiple near-fatal crashes and detox stints only to die of hypoxic respiratory failure at 81, lungs stiff from decades of cigarettes, and the infamous possum water bourbon. Merle Haggard's emphysema pinned him to a tour bus in 2016. After canceling show after show, he told friends, "I want to see what's on the other side." Double pneumonia took him on his 79th birthday. Eddie Rabbitt kept quiet about the lung cancer that shadowed every breezy love song he released in the late 90s. He even filmed a music video between chemotherapy cycles, hiding the IV bruises beneath a leather jacket. Their medical charts were battlefields: scar tissue on vocal cords, collapsed veins from repeated IV lines, biopsy sites that never fully healed. Unlike the sudden crashes we've witnessed, these endings stretched for seasons, giving fans hope with each brief remission only to pull it away during the next hospitalization. It's a kinder timeline on paper, no violent shock, but ask any family member who watched an icon struggle to breathe, and they'll tell you the drawn-out goodbye can be torture in slow motion. Chronic decline teaches one lesson. Sometimes the encore the crowd demands is a cruelty the body cannot afford. Our penultimate chapter turns from physical decay to moral corrosion, starring a fiddle king whose final act was as twisted as the strings he once bowed. Cash once joked that it's good to know who's in charge of your obituary. For these men, the real editor was time itself, slowly red-penning every line until only silence remained. Spade Cooley was crowned the king of Western swing, but the kingdom he ruled at home was built on terror. In 1961, he beat and tortured his wife Ella Mae for hours while their 10-year-old daughter hid behind a couch. Convicted of murder, he traded rhinestone suits for prison denim and spent 8 years practicing regret in the exercise yard. Then, in a plot twist too bizarre for a murder ballad, officials granted him a one-day furlough to play a charity concert. The audience gave a standing ovation. Moments later, backstage, he collapsed from a heart attack, dead before paramedics arrived. His autopsy read like bitter poetry, coronary failure inside a courthouse of redemption. Cooley's demise isn't a tragedy in the traditional sense. Few mourn the fall of a killer, but it completes our survey by showing how the same stage that immortalizes can also indict. Country music often forgives its scoundrels, yet here the final gavel came from the body itself, slamming shut any chance at a comeback narrative. When historians list great Western swing fiddle breaks, Cooley's solos still make the cut, proving that art and artists sometimes divorce after death. And maybe that's the darkest secret these autopsy reports reveal. A beautiful melody can rise from a ruinous life, and fans will keep humming even after learning the gruesome footnotes. Only one chapter remains, and it asks the question all these reports point toward: what price does authenticity demand, and who pays the balance when the singer is gone? Before we answer, consider this. Somewhere in Bakersfield, there's a dusty acetate of Cooley ripping through Shame on You with such joy it feels sacrilegious. That moral dissonance echoes across the genre, forcing listeners to confront whether loving a song means forgiving the singer. Every autopsy we've explored cuts deeper than flesh. It slices into that uneasy space between admiration and accountability. Keep that thought close as we step into the coda. The hardest chords always linger, unresolved, waiting for judgment. We've traced a crooked highway from Hank's Cadillac to Spade Cooley's prison stage, and every mile marker carried its own warning label. Some deaths were spectacular, the roar of jet engines, the flash of police cameras. Others unfolded in dim apartments where only a ticking clock kept time with slowing heartbeats. Yet the common refrain is the one Nashville writers love most. Every story costs something. For these stars, the currency was health, privacy, sanity, sometimes even the lives of those around them. Autopsy reports may feel clinical, but read together they form the rawest liner notes country music has ever printed. They remind us that legends are not carved from marble. They're stitched together with fragile vessels, porous bones, and hopes that bruise as easily as ours. So what do we do with this knowledge? We listen differently. When Patsy slides into that blue note, we hear the engine humming beneath her seat. When Naomi Judd harmonizes with her daughter, we picture a Hall of Fame trophy waiting in the dark, unaware its recipient is already gone. Understanding their endings doesn't dampen the music, it sharpens it, carving each lyric into something painfully intimate. And maybe that intimacy is the real inheritance these artists leave behind. A final request rings out from every hospital chart and accident report we explored tonight. Keep the song alive, but sing it with eyes open. Because somewhere right now, another hopeful guitarist is driving too fast through a rainstorm. Another songwriter is taking one more pill to calm a thought that won't let go. If just one of them turns up the radio and remembers how brutally honest these autopsies were, tragedy might lose its next headline. Until then, let the record spin, let the lessons linger, and let the silence after the last chord remind us what every encore truly costs. Let's honor them with wiser ears. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.